Welcome back again, and in this section we are going to be diving in a little bit deeper about the functions of the nervous system. We're just going to repeat it and add a little bit more detail. So what we talked about previously was we were going to have a sensory neuron bringing information towards the central nervous system and a motor neuron taking information out. So when we're talking about the functions, we're talking about sensory input, sensory information going in, motor output, which is motor information going out. But within the central nervous system, so within the spinal cord and or the brain, we have to make sense of the incoming message and figure out what the outgoing message is going to be. And that process is called integration. So that is the lead-in to something called the reflex arc, which you'll learn a lot more about in physiology when you study neurophysiology of reflexes. So in the reflex arc, there are 5 structures. Of the 5 structures, 3 are neurons, which means there are 3 neuron functions: sensory input, integration, and motor output, in that order. And so we have to add 2 other structures to those 3 neurons, and one's going to be at the beginning and one's going to be at the end. So here is an example of a typical reflex arc. You poke yourself with a pin. And the first thing that has to happen is you have to have a sensory receptor. That's the first structure. And what is going to happen is it will be activated. From the sensory receptor, we will have a sensory neuron whose dendrites now are carrying the message, goes to the cell body, and from the cell body, the incoming messages will then exit through the axon, which carries it to the central nervous system. So that's what this blue neuron is. The color codes are going to match the picture. In this reflex arc, the sensory neuron is sending the message to an interneuron. So the interneuron in this case is completely within the spinal cord. And so that's where integration is occurring. It could have gone up higher into the brain and then sent messages back down. There could have been 100 interneurons, but in this particular drawing, there's only 1 interneuron. So now the central nervous system knows what it wants the motor response to be. So it transfers that information to a motor neuron whose cell body is in the central nervous system. That's the red neuron, and is going to carry the message outside of it. And so that is called motor output. And the motor neuron carries the message that's going to cause some kind of effect, and so the names of the cells and organs that are going to carry out that message are called effector cells. So the 5 structures are going to be a sensory receptor, a sensory neuron, an interneuron, a motor neuron, an effector cell or organ. And the 3 neuron functions are the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th structure: the sensory input, integration, and motor output. Okay. Now on this picture, this is showing multiple interneurons. This follow the purple arrows. That's the sensory input from the finger to the spinal cord. And then I have to put my glasses to see where the cell bodies are. This is showing a different interneuron carrying the message upward into the brain, another interneuron carrying it to the primary sensory part of the brain, another interneuron carrying it to the primary motor part of the brain, another interneuron carrying it down to a different part of the brain, and another interneuron carrying it down to the spinal cord. And then finally, the last green neuron is the motor neuron carrying it back to the effector cells, which in this case will be the muscle cells in the finger. So this is what I said when there can be many interneurons. So let's go through these things one by one. sensor receptors are not only on the external part of your body, collecting information from your external environment, whether you're hot, whether you're cold, somebody's leaning on you, you have pain, whatever it is, but also internally. Okay, so they can be carrying information about what's the pH, what's the chemical composition, is your gut being stretched, all those types of things. All they do is gather information. And then that information gets transferred or stimulates a sensory neuron, which gives us sensory input. So what that's doing is converting that stimulus to some type of nervous impulse, which can travel down the axon of that neuron to carry it into the central nervous system. Do you see the axon terminal there sitting inside the brain? That's to let you know it's carrying it into the central nervous system. So where is this sensory neuron located? Okay, that's right. It is still outside the central nervous system. And this picture in the bottom left is showing a sensory neuron carrying the information into the spinal cord. So sensory neurons in the peripheral nervous system. After this, we're going to have the process of integration, which involves interneurons. And the interneurons can be in the spinal cord only, the brain only, or both the brain and the spinal cord. And what this does is it takes all the incoming information to that neuron and decides one outgoing message. So it has to make sense of a bunch of different messages and generates one specific response. And as I said previously, we can have one interneuron or we can have many interneurons. So where are the interneurons located? That's right, central nervous system. You can see them there located in the brain and the spinal cord. Then the next step was motor output, and this required motor neurons. So signals from those interneurons are giving the command. The cell body of the motor neuron is still in the central nervous system, but then the axon is carrying it all the way to where the motor response is going to occur. In this particular picture, it's showing it going to a skeletal muscle. So where's the motor neuron located? In the peripheral nervous system. And then the last step is the effector cells have to carry out the response. And the response can either be excitatory or inhibitory depending on what message it gets. I know usually we think, oh, well, muscle's going to contract and something's going to happen, but it could be inhibitory as well. Just keep that in the back of your mind all the time, even though usually we'll be talking about excitatory responses. Okay, so at this point, I think you've got the 5 steps with the 3 functions of the nervous system. If not, pause it and review it again. Where does sensory input occur? Peripheral nervous system through the sensory neuron. Where does integration occur? Central nervous system using what? That's right, interneurons. And where does motor output occur? Peripheral nervous system using motor neurons. So let's talk for a minute about what I mean by effector organs. They fall into 4 categories. The first category, skeletal muscle. So you name one of your 600 plus skeletal muscles, and each one of those can be an effector organ. The second category, smooth muscle. So smooth muscle is found in the walls of all your hollow viscera and your blood vessels. So it could be causing a blood vessel smooth muscle to contract, thereby increasing the pressure, or to relax, thereby increasing the blood flow, decreasing the pressure, or it could be causing uterine contractions, or it could be causing you to have urination or defecation. Whole bunch of things, or even the food just to move along the pathway in the swallowing process. The third effector organ, can you guess? Yeah, it's the third type of muscle, cardiac muscle. So we can tell the heart speed up, slow down, contract harder. And then we're out of muscles, okay? But we still have one more effector organ. And the last group is your glands. So your tears, your salivary glands, your glands in your intestines for secretions, any kind of gland in your body. Okay, so don't try to narrow down your sweat glands, your sebaceous glands, all those glands. All right. And with that, we are done with this aspect of the nervous system and introduction, and I will come back and see you shortly for the next exciting component.